The question came too late to save her, yet it followed her long after the train was gone. What kind of man cancels a marriage with a single sentence? Eleanor Ellie Hart stood alone on the wooden platform of Red Bluff Station as the last plume of steam dissolved into the winter sky, the iron wheels already fading into memory, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt intentional, as if the town itself had decided she did not belong. She held a small brown envelope in her gloved hand, the paper already soft from being unfolded too many times, the message inside brutally simple, stripped of apology or explanation. Arrangement cancelled. Do not come. Samuel Crowley. The words were neat, controlled, and final, and they arrived seconds after the train doors had shut behind her, ensuring there was no turning back, no argument to be made, no witness to her sudden undoing. Ellie lowered her hand slowly, the cold biting through her coat, through her boots, into the marrow of her bones. Red Bluff stretched out before her, a frontier town dressed in lamplight and snow, alive with voices and movement just moments earlier, now quietly dispersing as families headed home for supper. She watched them go with an expression that remained composed only because shock had not yet loosened its grip. She had crossed half the country with one plan, one fragile promise of safety, a practical marriage to a man she had never met, arranged through letters and intermediaries, not for love, but for survival, an agreement meant to end years of scarcity, suspicion, and whispered disgrace back east. That plan had been erased with a sentence, and now she stood with no claim, no invitation, and no idea where to go next. She checked her purse once more, though she already knew its contents by heart. 17 cents, a button, a folded photograph of her parents, long gone. That was the total measure of what she had left in the world. Ellie exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the air, and forced herself to move. Standing still would not warm her, would not feed her, would not conjure a bed out of thin air. The town's main street glowed ahead, lanterns swinging gently in the wind, the smell of coal smoke and cooked meat drifting through the cold. She told herself to walk like someone expected somewhere, like a woman with a destination, even as her boots slipped slightly on the packed snow. The boarding house she found first was narrow and tall, its windows fogged with warmth. A sign advertised clean rooms by the night. Ellie stepped inside, her fingers stiff as she removed her gloves, and asked for the cheapest room available. The woman behind the desk barely looked up when she named the price. Ellie counted her coins anyway, laid them out carefully, as if the act itself might change the sum. It did not. The woman's eyes flicked to the table, then back to Ellie's face, already closing off, already moving on. There was no cruelty in it, only routine. Poverty, Ellie realized, was rarely dramatic. It was administrative. She stepped back outside before the shame could settle fully into her chest, the door clicking shut behind her with a decisiveness that echoed Samuel's telegram. The street had thinned now, laughter replaced by the crunch of boots and the distant sound of a piano somewhere deeper in town. Ellie walked without direction until hunger made itself known, sharp and insistent, her body reminding her that she had eaten nothing since morning. That was when she saw the restaurant, a squat brick building with warm light spilling through its windows and a simple painted sign above the door. Iron pot. She hesitated. She already knew she could not afford a meal. But the smell, roasted meat, bread, something sweet, pulled at her in a way that bypassed dignity and went straight to need. She stood just outside the door, pretending to adjust her scarf, when it opened from the inside. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements unhurried. He took one look at her, really looked, not with curiosity or suspicion, but with an assessing calm, as if he were reading a situation rather than a person. "You hungry?" he asked. Ellie straightened immediately. "I'm fine," she said, too quickly. The man nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something he had already assumed. "There's food going to waste," he said. "Cook doesn't like throwing it out." He held the door open. "You can help with that." There was no pity in his voice, no performance of kindness, just fact. Ellie followed him inside before she could overthink it, the warmth hitting her all at once, nearly stealing her breath. She was guided to a small table near the back, where a plate appeared in front of her. Beef, potatoes, carrots glazed with something sweet, thick bread still warm. She stared at it for a moment too long. "I can't pay," she said quietly. "I didn't ask you to," the man replied, already turning away. "A full plate doesn't mean much if you eat it alone." She ate slowly at first, careful, restrained. But hunger soon overrode caution. The food grounded her, pulled her back into her body, reminded her that she was still here, still alive, still capable of accepting something without owing herself away for it. A cup of coffee followed, placed gently at her elbow by the cook, a heavy-set man with flour on his sleeves who said nothing at all. When Ellie finally looked up again, the man who had brought her in was sitting across from her, his coat folded beside him. "My name's Cal Reed," he said. "You got somewhere to sleep tonight?" Ellie shook her head once. Saying it out loud made it real in a way she had been avoiding. Cal considered this, then stood. "Come on," he said. "I know someone." They walked through the cold together, the silence between them unforced. Cal led her to a modest house set slightly apart from the others, light glowing warmly through its windows. He knocked once, and when the door opened, a woman with steady eyes and silver-threaded hair took in the scene without surprise. "This is Abigail Nez," Cal said. "She helps people pass through." Abigail looked at Ellie, really looked, and then stepped aside. "You can come in," she said. "We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." As Ellie crossed the threshold, the door closing softly behind her, she felt something shift. Not relief exactly, not yet, but possibility. Outside, the wind howled across Red Bluff, indifferent and sharp. Inside, the air was warm, and for the first time since the train had left her behind, Ellie allowed herself to believe that survival might not require disappearance. Morning arrived quietly in Abigail Nez's house, not with bells or voices, but with the steady rhythm of work already underway. Ellie woke to the smell of bread baking and wood smoke curling through the floorboards, the kind of domestic sound that suggested purpose rather than comfort, a place where survival was practiced daily and never announced. She lay still for a moment, listening, reminding herself where she was. The small room was clean and spare, a narrow bed, a chair, a folded blanket placed with care. Nothing about it claimed permanence, yet nothing pushed her out either. That balance alone felt like mercy. Abigail did not ask questions over breakfast. She set a bowl of porridge in front of Ellie, poured coffee, and nodded toward a list tacked near the door. Chores. Ellie understood immediately. Work was the language of belonging here. She accepted it gratefully. Scrubbing floors, peeling vegetables, folding linens, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned early that usefulness was a kind of shield. In the afternoons, she read to Rose, whose initial shyness softened into quiet attention as Ellie gave voices to fairy tales that felt far removed from the snow and wind outside. In the evenings, Ellie slept hard, exhaustion overtaking worry before it could fully form. Cal checked in without making it obvious. Sometimes he walked her back from the iron pot with leftover bread. Sometimes he only tipped his hat in passing. His presence was steady, unintrusive, and Ellie found that it mattered more than grand gestures ever could. Kindness, she was learning, did not always announce itself. Often, it simply stayed. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered with the rest of the post, slipped onto the hall table like any other envelope. Ellie recognized the name immediately. Margaret Crowley. The paper trembled slightly in her hands as she opened it, bracing for something she could not yet name. The words were formal, precise, written with the careful distance of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than offering comfort. Samuel Crowley, the letter explained, had died weeks earlier after being thrown from a horse. The delay in communication was regrettable. Any confusion surrounding arrangements was unfortunate, but resolved. Ellie read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and set it down. The feeling that followed was not grief in the way stories described it. She had never known Samuel. She had not imagined his face, his voice, his habits. What she mourned was simpler and heavier. The loss of direction, the collapse of a future she had already begun to live inside. She sat at the table for a long time, staring at nothing, until Abigail placed a cup of tea beside her and sat across without speaking. That was enough. Ellie did not need consolation. She needed space to understand that plans could die even when people did not matter. The town began to shift after that, subtly at first. Ellie noticed glances that lingered a second too long, conversations that paused when she entered a room. Red Bluff was small enough that stories traveled quickly and selectively. It was not long before Victor Crowley arrived, his presence announced by polished boots and a voice that carried authority without warmth. He approached Ellie after a Sunday service, choosing a public space while keeping his tone low, controlled. He expressed condolences with the efficiency of a man who considered emotions a formality. Then he spoke of estates, of legal clarity, of preventing misunderstandings. He produced a document and placed it between them, along with an envelope thick enough to be unmistakable. $200. Enough to start over somewhere else. Enough to disappear quietly. Ellie listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she pushed the papers back toward him. "I won't sign," she said. Victor's expression tightened, not with anger but calculation. He warned her gently, almost kindly, about how things worked in towns like Red Bluff, about reputations, about assumptions. Ellie met his gaze and repeated herself. Cal stood a few feet away, close enough to be seen, far enough to avoid escalation. Victor gathered his things and left without raising his voice. But the threat lingered in the air long after he was gone. The rumors followed quickly. They did not name her directly at first. They rarely needed to. Ellie heard fragments in the market, half-formed sentences that stopped when she passed. Sister Anne found her one afternoon in the chapel pantry and spoke plainly. A woman's past, she said, could be shaped into whatever story best suited those with power. The only defense was consistency, visibility, living in a way that left no room for doubt. Ellie took the advice to heart. She worked harder. She showed up early and stayed late. She helped organize supplies, assisted with church meals, spoke politely to those who would meet her eyes and calmly to those who would not. She did not argue. She did not explain unless asked. Slowly, imperceptibly, the air shifted again. One morning, a loaf of bread appeared on the doorstep with a small jar of jam and a note written in an unfamiliar hand. "We all start somewhere." The gesture undid her more than any open support could have. It told her she was being watched not with suspicion, but with care. Winter tightened its grip before loosening. Snowstorms rolled in without warning, the kind that erased paths and swallowed sound. It was during one of these storms that Rose went missing, her absence discovered just as the wind began to rise. Panic spread through the house like fire. Ellie did not stop to think. She pulled on her coat and followed Cal into the white, calling Rose's name until her throat burned. The world narrowed to inches, visibility collapsing into chaos, fear pressing in from all sides. Cal moved with purpose, reading the land through instinct and memory. He found Rose huddled in the remains of an old trading post, cold and barely conscious. They carried her back together, fighting the wind, fighting time. By the fire that night, as Rose slowly warmed and slept, Cal spoke of his wife, lost years earlier to a storm much like this one. He did not dramatize it. He did not soften it. He simply told the truth. Ellie listened, understanding something essential. Survival did not mean avoiding pain. It meant carrying it and continuing anyway. By the time spring hinted at return, Ellie had begun to belong not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through presence, work, and refusal to disappear. Victor Crowley had not vanished from the edges of the story, but his hold was weakening. And Ellie, once abandoned on a platform with nothing but 17 cents and a canceled promise, was no longer alone in Red Bluff. She was seen. And that, she was learning, was the beginning of power. The rumors did not end all at once. They thinned, stretched, lost their sharpest edges, but they never fully disappeared. Ellie learned to live with the sound of her own name traveling ahead of her, arriving in rooms before she did, sometimes softened by familiarity, sometimes still sharpened by doubt. Red Bluff was not cruel by nature, but it was cautious, and caution often dressed itself as judgment. Ellie understood that now. She did not ask the town to trust her. She asked only to be allowed to remain visible. Visibility, she discovered, required discipline. It meant showing up even when it would be easier to stay hidden. It meant speaking plainly when spoken to, offering help without apology, and allowing people to observe her without flinching. She took on more responsibility at Abigail's house, managing supplies, keeping accounts, repairing what could be repaired. She helped Sister Ann organize winter provisions for families who needed them. She stood in line at the market like everyone else, meeting glances without challenge or retreat. Slowly, the shape of her presence changed. She became predictable, reliable, harder to reduce to rumor alone. Cal watched this from a careful distance. He did not interfere, did not speak on her behalf, but his steadiness was unmistakable. When he offered opinions, they were measured. When he offered help, it came without debt. He treated Ellie not as a problem to be solved, but as a person navigating a difficult passage. That distinction mattered more than either of them acknowledged aloud. Victor Crowley, however, was not finished. His pressure shifted from polite warnings to calculated inconvenience. Letters arrived addressed to Ellie with language designed to unsettle, legal phrasing meant to suggest consequences without naming them. He reminded her, indirectly, of her vulnerability, of how quickly goodwill could be reversed. Each message was an attempt to provoke fear. Ellie read them carefully, then filed them away. Fear, she understood now, was exactly what he needed her to show. The storm arrived without ceremony, as frontier storms often did, moving in faster than predictions allowed. By midday, the sky had collapsed into white, the wind rising to a howl that rattled windows and erased familiar landmarks. Travel became impossible within hours. People closed in, securing doors, counting heads. It was only when the house had gone quiet that Abigail realized Rose was not inside. Panic did not announce itself. It settled heavily, like the snow itself, pressing down until movement felt difficult. Ellie felt it but did not allow it to root. She pulled on her coat, her hands steady despite the cold. Cal was already at the door, rope and lantern in hand, his expression focused, contained. They moved into the storm together, voices nearly useless against the wind. Ellie called Rose's name anyway, again and again, each syllable torn apart before it could travel. The world narrowed to sound and instinct, to the shared understanding that stopping was not an option. Snow filled Ellie's boots. Her coat grew heavy with ice. Her breath came sharp and painful. But she followed Cal without question, trusting his knowledge of the land, his memory of places that no longer officially existed. They found the trading post by accident as much as intention, a dark shape half buried under years of neglect. Inside, Rose was curled against the far wall, her skin cold, her breathing shallow. Ellie dropped to her knees without thinking, wrapping the child in her own coat while Cal built a fire from scraps and determination. The weight felt endless. When Rose finally stirred, a weak sound escaping her throat, Ellie felt something inside her give way, not into tears, but into resolve. They carried Rose home through the storm, moving slowly, carefully, as if speed might undo the fragile progress they had made. By the time they reached the house, Abigail was waiting at the door, her composure cracking only when she touched her daughter's face and felt warmth return. The relief in the room was palpable, thick, communal. For the first time since Ellie's arrival, the fear was shared rather than directed. That night, after Rose slept, Cal spoke quietly by the fire. He told Ellie about his wife, about the storm that had taken her years earlier, about the guilt that followed survival. He did not frame it as tragedy. He framed it as fact. Ellie listened, understanding the weight of what he was offering her. Not a confession, but a truth. She responded with her own, admitting how often she had mistaken endurance for living, how close she had come to disappearing entirely. The storm passed by morning, leaving Red Bluff reshaped but standing. News of Rose's rescue traveled quickly, carried with a different tone than the rumors before it. Ellie noticed the change immediately. People met her eyes. They spoke her name directly. Gratitude replaced suspicion in ways that felt tentative but real. She did not take credit. She did not deflect it either. She accepted it with quiet grace. Victor Crowley returned soon after, his approach more aggressive now, less careful. He referenced the storm, the danger, the instability of Ellie's situation. He suggested, again, that leaving might be safest for everyone involved. Ellie listened, then told him calmly that she was staying, that Red Bluff was no longer a place she was passing through. Victor's frustration was evident, his control slipping as he realized that intimidation had lost its power. Spring did not arrive all at once, but the promise of it lingered. Cal offered Ellie work at his ranch, real work with real wages, and a small plot of land to tend as she saw fit. He framed it not as charity, but as opportunity. Ellie accepted, understanding the significance of the choice. It was not rescue. It was partnership, however undefined. By choosing to remain visible through rumor and storm alike, Ellie had done something irreversible. She had allowed herself to be known, to be seen in moments of fear and courage both. The town responded not with absolution, but with acknowledgement. And in the quiet space between winter and spring, Ellie recognized that her fate was no longer something to be decided for her. It was something she was actively shaping, one deliberate step at a time. The decision to speak did not arrive as a burst of courage. It came quietly, after weeks of measured living. After Ellie realized that silence was no longer protection, but permission. Victor Crowley's letters continued to arrive with polite menace, their language sharpening, the implications growing more explicit. He did not threaten directly. He suggested outcomes. Loss of work, loss of standing, loss of safety. He relied on the town's imagination to do the rest. Ellie read each letter once, then placed it carefully into a folder she kept beneath her bed, not as evidence for a court, but as a record of how fear tried to disguise itself as inevitability. The moment came on an ordinary afternoon. The notice board outside the Mercantile stood cluttered with handbills and church announcements, the town's informal memory. Ellie arrived with a folded newspaper clipping in her coat pocket, its edges worn from handling. She pinned it up herself, straightened it, and stepped back. The article told the story Victor hoped would remain distorted. The financial scandal in Philadelphia, the missing funds, the accusation that had followed Ellie across states like a shadow. But this version named names. It listed dates. It included statements Ellie had never been allowed to give. It was not an appeal for sympathy. It was a statement of fact. People gathered slowly. No one shouted. No one argued. They read. They reread. Ellie stood nearby, visible but not defensive, answering questions plainly when asked, declining to embellish. She did not explain why she had waited. She did not ask forgiveness. By the time Victor arrived, summoned by word of mouth, the board had already done its work. His authority faltered in the face of clarity. What had once been rumor was now documented truth. His leverage dissolved not with drama, but with exposure. He confronted her anyway, his composure brittle. He warned her of consequences, of the costs of defiance. Ellie listened and replied with the calm certainty that had taken her months to build. "You don't get to decide who I am anymore," she said. The town watched. Victor left with less certainty than he had brought, and Ellie understood then that power could be weakened simply by refusing to hide. The accident came days later, sudden and violent in its simplicity. Cal was thrown from his horse while checking a fence line, the ground frozen hard beneath him. By the time Ellie reached him, His breathing was shallow, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach drop. She did not scream. She knelt, spoke to him steadily, kept him conscious until help arrived. The hours that followed blurred into movement and waiting, into the smell of antiseptic and the sound of wind pressing against windows. Cal survived, but the night tested Ellie in ways rumor never had. Sitting beside his bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, she felt fear sharpen into something more precise than panic. It was not the fear of being alone again. It was the fear of caring enough for loss to matter. She realized how carefully she had built her life to avoid that exact vulnerability, how survival had taught her to value endurance over attachment. Loving Cal meant accepting risk she could not calculate. When he woke, she did not speak immediately. She let relief settle, let the truth find its shape. Cal met her gaze, reading the change without comment. Their conversation was brief, unadorned. He did not promise safety. She did not ask for it. What passed between them was quieter and more binding than vows. Victor made one final attempt. A formal offer arrived from Philadelphia, clean and generous, designed to look like mercy. Enough money to live comfortably elsewhere, enough distance to erase the past entirely. All it required was disappearance. Ellie read the letter once, then folded it and set it aside. She did not consult anyone. The answer was already clear. She returned to the notice board and pinned her refusal beneath the article, a single sentence written in her own hand. "I am staying." The effect was immediate, not dramatic, but decisive. The town did not cheer. It did not need to. The choice itself was enough. Cal healed slowly. Ellie helped at the ranch, tending the small plot he had offered her, planting seeds saved from another life. The work grounded her. It reminded her that growth required patience and exposure, that roots formed only where they were allowed to remain. When Cal joined her again, walking carefully, they worked side by side without ceremony. Their partnership defined less by words than by shared labor. Ellie understood now what her deepest fear had been all along. Not poverty, not disgrace, not even loss. It was the risk of loving something enough to build a future around it. Standing in the open, hands in the soil, she accepted that risk fully. The choice had been made, and for the first time, it was hers alone. Spring did not arrive with celebration. It came quietly, almost cautiously, as if Red Bluff itself needed proof that the worst had passed. Snow retreated in uneven patches, revealing earth that looked raw but willing. And Ellie learned to read the land the way she had learned to read people, by noticing what endured once pressure eased. She rose early each morning, walked the familiar path between Abigail's house and Cal's ranch, and worked until her muscles ached in a way that felt earned. The routine steadied her. It replaced vigilance with intention. Victor Crowley's absence was not announced, but it was felt. No more letters arrived, no more carefully phrased warnings or offers disguised as generosity. His power had relied on shadows, and Ellie had removed them. In their place came something less dramatic but far more substantial, the town's gradual acceptance of her permanence. Shopkeepers spoke to her without hesitation. Neighbors asked for help and offered it in return. Margaret Fenley brought over jars of preserves one afternoon without explanation, leaving them on the table and staying just long enough to talk about the weather. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition. Ellie began to understand community not as a single moment of welcome, but as accumulation. Small exchanges repeated until they formed trust. She no longer felt the need to prove herself. Her work did that quietly, consistently. At the ranch, she took responsibility for the garden, learning which crops thrived and which resisted, accepting failure as part of the process. Cal never interfered. He asked her opinion, listened, adjusted. Their partnership settled into something solid, defined by mutual respect rather than declaration. They spoke of the future in practical terms. Repairs that needed doing, fences to replace. The house at Abigail's place that strained to hold everyone comfortably. It was Ellie who first suggested building an addition, a proper kitchen that could serve not just one family, but whoever needed it. The idea spread quickly, not as charity, but as investment. Neighbors offered tools, time, labor. No one framed it as a favor. It was simply work that needed doing. Construction began with little ceremony. Ellie watched walls rise where none had stood before, beams set carefully into place. Each measured cut a commitment to staying. She worked alongside everyone else, hauling boards, preparing meals, tending fires. In the evenings, when the day's labor ended, she sat with Cal on the steps and felt a sense of exhaustion that carried satisfaction rather than fear. There was no moment when she formally chose Red Bluff. The choice revealed itself through repetition. One night, as the kitchen neared completion, Ellie stood alone inside the unfinished room, lantern light casting long shadows across fresh wood. She rested her hand against the counter frame and felt something settle fully. Finally. The past had not disappeared. It no longer needed to. It had been carried here, integrated, stripped of its power to dictate her future. She had not escaped it. She had outlived its control. Cal joined her without announcement, leaning against the doorway, watching her with the same calm attentiveness he had shown from the beginning. Their understanding did not require elaboration. Love, Ellie realized, was not an interruption to her life. It was the structure forming around it, shaped by shared effort and trust. She did not fear it now. She respected it. When the kitchen was finished, the town gathered without invitation. Food appeared. Laughter followed. Ellie moved through the room. Receiving congratulations, she did not deflect. Gratitude she accepted without shrinking. Abigail watched from the corner, pride unhidden. Rose sat at the table, reading aloud to anyone who would listen, her voice steady, confident. Ellie saw in her the proof of what safety could grow. As the evening wound down, Ellie stepped outside for air. The stars were sharp against the dark sky, the land quiet but alive. She thought of the girl who had arrived on the train platform months earlier, clutching a canceled promise and 17 cents. She did not feel pity for her. She felt respect. Survival had brought her here. Choice had kept her. Ellie understood now that home was not something she had been denied and finally granted. It was something she had built deliberately, with work, honesty, and the courage to remain visible. Red Bluff had not saved her. It had responded to her refusal to disappear. She went back inside, closing the door gently behind her, the sound final and comforting. Whatever came next would be faced here, not in motion, not in flight, but grounded in place and purpose. For the first time, Ellie Hart did not measure her life by what she had escaped, but by what she was willing to stay for. Later, when the house had gone quiet and the lamps were turned low, Ellie stood at the kitchen doorway and let the moment stretch. The room held warmth now, not just from the fire, but from use, from voices that had filled it, from hands that had worked side by side without question. She breathed slowly, allowing the silence to settle instead of fearing it. Outside, the land rested under a clear sky, no longer hostile, simply vast, waiting. She thought of the long road behind her, the train pulling away, the cold platform, the certainty that she had been erased. That certainty felt distant now, almost unreal. What replaced it was not triumph, not even peace, but something steadier. Belonging, earned rather than granted. Love, chosen rather than promised. A future shaped not by rescue, but by presence. Ellie understood that survival had taught her how to endure, but staying had taught her how to live. She no longer listened for footsteps leaving. She listened for the quiet proof of continuity, the creak of the house settling, the breath of those sleeping nearby, the knowledge that morning would bring work she was prepared to do. She closed the door softly and did not look back. She was no longer surviving. She was home. End of article. Good night.